Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
More and more, the lines between regional concerns and global community is less distinct. The Carolinas region has already had and have been a net exporter of goods and services for many years now. But now, as the standardization of the euro becomes more commonplace and the world is even flatter than ever, the Carolinas' place among America and the world stage is increasingly significant. Welcome again to the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and we will chat about those current issues that matter most in North and South Carolina. And later, Tom Finke from global financial services firm Babson Capital.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Ben Haskew, president of the Greenville Chamber of Commerce, John Paul Gallus, publisher of Greater Charlotte Biz, and special guest Tom Finke, CEO of Babson Capital. Now, here's Chris William.
Hello, welcome to our program. Happy weekend. Ben, John, good to have you both here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Good to be back.
You know, Ben, I want to start with you because it seems like, and we've talked about on this program and in many other forums besides here, we've talked about the lack of movement on funding transportation in the Palmetto State. North Carolina is not immune to that as well, transportation and education. But specifically in South Carolina, and I want to read something to you because it's up in your neck of the woods in the upstate. Dollar Tree recently announced that it's building a regional distribution headquarters kind of near the inland port.
Yeah.
Any of those deals that are near the inland port, most likely, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, most likely have to do with transportation and the ease of connectivity. What is it going to take for lawmakers in South Carolina to get more assertive with transportation funding and getting transportation going in the right direction with funding and infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera?
Chris, the good news is we're in the middle of a 2-year legislative session. There was some movement in this first year of the 2-year session around transportation, some one-time funds that came through, but you know, the fact of the matter is South Carolina has more state roads than almost any other state. That's a historical thing that we've got to deal with. Our Department of Transportation says we need, you know, a minimum of $1 billion a year for maintenance of roads and bridges and so forth. The business community in South Carolina has certainly begun a strong push to give our legislators cover on this issue. I mean, chambers of commerce and business groups are saying, we've got to pass a gas tax to get this done. And I think that as we come back for this next part of the legislative session, we've got to see movement on the Senate side, but it's an $800 million to $1 billion issue that we've got to get addressed in South Carolina because we have not addressed this in a substantial way since 1987.
So Governor Haley flying pretty high on her numbers after the Confederate flag, and I don't want to just dismiss that as political theater. I mean, she has done some great things about that. But if she digs her heels in, or as she has already said, she's not going to go along with a gas tax, can the State House override her and make it happen anyway?
Well, that's a big question. You know, it takes a a large majority to make that override a reality. But I think more and more the citizenry of South Carolina are really beginning to say to their legislators, it's time. We've got to do something. And I think that's what it's going to ultimately take to get both houses to move.
In North Carolina, John Paul, the dialogue's a little bit different, but the problem still remains the same about transportation. And I know that's got to be one of the longest sessions on record now. The North Carolina General Assembly and the House and the Senate and the governor have all had different ideas about transportation infrastructure funding. Is this transportation issue in North Carolina reached a tipping point? Do we have to do something about it?
Well, it reached enough of a tipping point that our transportation secretary resigned recently, and that's troublesome because we thought he was going to be very helpful in moving transportation forward in a very big way. I think what's important is that people have to wake up to the reality that this region is going to grow dramatically over the next 50 years. And in order to accept those people into this community and continue to attract big businesses, we've got to have an infrastructure that supports that. Greenville has a wonderful intermodal center in Greer, and Charlotte has a wonderful intermodal center at the airport, and there's another great one in Greensboro. But if that supply chain network is not supported by a great transportation community here in the Carolinas, then we're not going to be as successful as we ought to be.
Do you get the sense that there's a vision among legislators to see that?
No, I don't think there is at all, and I think that's part of the problem. Sharon Decker did a great job when she was Commerce Director. She and Bobby Hitt had a great relationship and really understood the needs of building out that supply chain network and having intermodal stops to get trucks off the road and more containers onto trains into our ports. We sit in this region at the axis of 4 or 5 major ports. The I-85 corridor is going to continue to be an important region for advanced manufacturing. Those products have to access those ports, and we're in a great position to give them that access, but we've got to have the transportation network to support that.
And Chris, just to add on to that, I mean, the inland port at Greer was in part put there to serve the market, the broader market of the Carolinas and so forth, but also to relieve congestion on I-26. I-26 essentially is a two-lane
You're talking
interstate.
about the truck traffic on I-26?
Yeah, the truck traffic on I-26. But there are times on I-26 when it comes to a dead stop just because of volume, nothing to do with accidents. I mean, it is a very congested highway. So, you know, we've got to address the physical side, the lane miles that we need in addition to things like the inland port facilities.
We've got about a minute and a half left, and this is not going to be fair time for it, but many issues have come up: transportation, education, economic development have come up with the specter of overlaying all of that is this issue of rural and urban divide. Is that, I don't want to say, is that a recycled, there's always going to be an urban-rural divide, or is there something new about the, pitting the rural communities against the more urban city centers? Ben, I'll start with you.
Well, I think one thing South Carolina's done is we've looked at the state in our case, a 10-county region. And, you mentioned early on the Dollar Tree announcement for Union County, one of the most rural counties in our region. But that's great economic development, and it feeds on a region that has a transportation corridor, I-85, the inland port facility, but the other things that we have to offer in terms of, developing a workforce and the other industries that are there. So I think, it's certainly tougher on the rural communities because many times they don't have the infrastructure in place and other things that are needed to support economic development. But I think this regional idea of really tying and working together is making some sense.
Yeah, John Paul.
Well, I think people have to wake up to the reality that the future is very promising in terms of business growth and development. We're likely to see some major growth that will affect both urban and rural communities, and we ought to find ways to work together. The president just received trade promotion authority from Congress to negotiate 2 deals, one in the Pacific and one with Europe. Both of those open real opportunities for more business growth, businesses that want to be part of the domestic U.S. economy, but also because we've got great workers and we've got great training for workers to help them get to the skill levels of these advanced manufacturing firms.
You know what, and John Paul, again, this is not going to be fair. In just a couple seconds, I want to read a statistic, and it was in your publication. There is more European investment in North or South Carolina alone than the total U.S. investment in China, Japan, and India combined.
Isn't that exciting? I mean, that offers huge opportunities, especially with this new transatlantic trade and investment pact that's being negotiated. Population is not growing in Europe. And if those businesses want to expand, they've got to go to a location where they've got access to good workers. They've got great access to workers here in the Southeast. We're attracting people to Greenville, to Charlotte, to this region in a very big way. And we've got a great college system that can help train workers for those businesses. We're not here just to recruit jobs. We're here to recruit direct foreign investment to this region.
Yeah, I can tell you're passionate. You've done just a little bit of work on this. I know that about you. Gentlemen, thank you. And speaking of college presidents and colleges, we are going to have the UNC System President Tom Ross back on this program in upcoming weeks. Tom is retiring at the end of this year. It brings up succession and leadership issues, and what about UNC System and what about its funding? We'll talk to Tom Ross about that. Also, the North Carolina State Treasurer Janet Cowell will be back. And also coming up, I just forgot that. Donna, remind me again. Thank you. It's pretty bad when you have to ask the crew what you should be remembering. Jim Rogers, how could I forget that? Chairman and Chief Executive, former Chairman and Chief Executive of Duke Energy will also be here. You know, in the spring of last year, our guest's company announced what would be the first major Charlotte Uptown Tower to be completed since 2010. It's meaningful, and it's also significant because the anchor and the author tenant makes it their business to know when to allocate capital and where to allocate it. They know a little something about managing risk. Babson Capital is a global investment management firm with over $200 billion in assets under management, with institutional clients in more than 20 countries around the world. Joining us now, Babson Chairman and Chief Executive Officer Tom Finke. Mr. Chairman, welcome to the program.
Chris, thanks. Great to be here.
Tom, why would you guys put a big stake in the ground, a 25-story tower you announced last year? I mean, now it looks like, well, not leaning into this, but now it looks like you're geniuses because of the level of commercial activity going on. But what would make you so compelled to say, we're going to make a pretty big bet in real estate to do that?
Really, there's 2 reasons. One is a pure investment analysis. And so about $45 billion of our $218 billion under management is in commercial real estate in the U.S. and Europe. So this is part of our business, investing in real estate. Our parent company, MassMutual, had owned the key piece of property, a Third and Tryon, for over 2 decades. And really just when you looked at the fact that buildings hadn't been started since the crisis, that the Class A office space in downtown in the CBD was trending towards single digits.
And CBD is Charlotte.
Charlotte Business District, yes.
Yeah.
It just was a compelling decision to, yes, this is time to look at putting a building up. The second piece was the fact that Babson was growing in Charlotte. We are about 200 people in Charlotte today. Our space needs will continue to grow in the next 2 to 3 years. So whenever you start a big building like that, you kind of look for an anchor tenant, and we had one.
Yeah.
So you put those 2 facts together, and we made the business decision to build the tower.
You know, can you, to some degree, and I'm not asking you to kind of go through each market in the Carolinas and say, well, yeah, no, maybe, yeah, we like that space. But you'd be hard-pressed to go to any city center, Raleigh, upstate South Carolina, Columbia, Charleston, Asheville, without seeing that kind of investment going on now.
Right.
Oh, so I would say, when you look at these cranes and look at the commercial activity, how do we make sure we don't run into what happened in 07 and consequently 08 and 09?
Well, I think, especially in commercial real estate, the real tipping point was 89, 91, the big commercial real estate crisis. And I think that in that, it's a matter of how much speculative growth is there in a certain region that you're looking at. So that's why I mentioned the vacancy rate in CBD, the fact that it was trending down, that it was going into single digits, and that there was no new supply, and that we knew that rent rollovers in 17 and 18 in Charlotte's Central District were going to spike. You look at factors like that and make an adjustment. Now, you could see areas where maybe the trend's getting ahead of itself. Multifamily is a good example. There was a spike in demand for renting after the mortgage crisis across America. Certain areas you might see that building starting to get ahead of that demand. So it's always a matter when you're investing in real estate to really look at what's coming online, where's the demand trending. And right now, because of the strength of the economic growth in the Carolinas, we're in a pretty good position in pretty much most real estate sectors to invest and not overbuilt in any way.
Ben?
The question comes to my mind is, how do you look at markets for investments like that? I mean, obviously Charlotte is one size market. Greenville is a different size market. We've got we got 3 hotels under construction in downtown right now, a lot of commercial development. Do you look at the Greenville size communities around the Southeast region?
Depends on the sector. Our office investment has usually been in larger cities, from New York to DC to Charlotte, the major MSAs.
Right.
But we also invest in hotels, we invest in multifamily. So a lot of that type of investment is often in strong growth regions in regional cities like Greenville. And again, we'll look at what's the trend, the demand, where's demand trending, how's the economy doing for that type of real estate asset class.
Terrific, thank you.
Jump on.
I'm part of a group called the Global Vision Leaders Group that's trying to make Charlotte a hub of international commerce. Site Selection magazine in December 2013 looked at 100 cities across the globe, and Charlotte happened to be listed as one of those. It was ranked 33rd in terms of a cross-factor analysis, but 78th in terms of global finance. We don't have a good reputation in that regard. What can Babson Capital do to enhance that and help promote Charlotte as a global hub of commerce?
Sure. Well, I think that's been developing over the years in terms of, with the big banks, really it became the banking hub. And now we're becoming more of a financial hub. We're going to have our corporate headquarters. We have our corporate headquarters here in Charlotte now. There are other firms moving in. Another asset manager recently announced a fairly big move of 300 or 400 jobs to Charlotte. And what's happening in finance, it is a global game. We invest not just in the US, we're investing in Europe and Asia Pacific. We're investing in companies, we're investing in real estate. And interestingly enough, our investors, about 40% of our investors are international.
Is that right?
So they're coming to see us in Charlotte. So one of the things we can do is, as we bring people into the city, is like anything else, you show it off a little bit. And certainly with the new building, we'll be anxious to bring a lot of our clients to Charlotte.
So Tom, how that's a good point about not just 40% of investors in you are international, but when you look at international markets, is the volatility, is the rate of investment, is the the valuations of equity and fixed income and money, are the distinctions becoming less and less between international and domestic, or what do you see?
I don't know if the distinctions are less, but the relative impact of movements in different markets are becoming more interconnected. So you have a lot of focus, quite frankly. We'll take the Greece example. There was a lot of focus and day-to-day impacts on U.S. and global markets. And when you think about it, a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's so much communication. Everything's real time. People focus intently on what's going on. So I think that the world, through communication, through the internet, through the breaking down of barriers of time and distance, is creating an environment where, yes, you're waking up and you're looking at what happened in Asia and seeing where Europe is trading, and then you're off to work. So there's a whole 45 minutes or an hour absorbing information before I even get in the car.
Ben?
You know, we talked about the direct foreign investment that's happening and has happened for 40, 50 years in both states. And surely it's about economics in terms of your world and what you look at, but it's also about relationships. I wonder if we couldn't do more as a region, a mega region, if you would, with developing organizations that help us. I mean, we court, as an example, the Consul General Corps out of Atlanta and Washington, as far as that goes. But I believe we could all benefit, and you know, would you agree, Tom, that we could do more in that regard and maybe direct relationships with Europeans and other markets?
I think so. I think you know, the fact that you have more and more global multinationals, you know, coming here and American companies going over there. You know, it's the cross ownership, if you will. Companies have a stake. Foreign companies have a stake in the Carolinas, and you know, courting that engagement with their executives is important. I think it's also important to have that governmental relationship, you know, with the foreign governments. And you know, it's interesting. The American embassy system is really a means. People think of it as a diplomatic enterprise, which it certainly is, but it's probably most of our diplomats spend most of their time on economic issues. So I think if we can take better advantage of the ties between the foreign entities, foreign governments, and our regional leadership, I think that'll help.
Right.
John Paul.
I think it's really important to focus on the U.S. as a competitor in the globe, and we obviously want the United States to continue to be powerful in that regard. I think this region in particular has an opportunity to take a close look at the supply chain network between our ports at Jacksonville, Savannah, Charleston, Wilmington, and Norfolk. There are very few regions that offer that many different choices to a manufacturer trying to get their goods distributed around the world. How can we get known as the best supply chain network location and attract the kinds of advanced manufacturing companies that you'd like to invest in? What criteria are you looking for?
I think, and to the earlier part of the show, I think you made a good point. We have great ports. We're building intermodal, which I think industrial intermodal is a very interesting real estate investment area of growth. You got to make sure the roads and the rails keep up. You know, those are all important aspects.
Absolutely.
So one, infrastructure is absolutely critical. Then you got to go out and really show the value to these foreign companies. But what's really interesting is if you think about it, it's just the dynamic of commerce is changing. The dynamic of how we buy is changing. More is coming to the house. It's that last mile is also very interesting. So, you know, as we become an internet economy, or internet consumers, I should say, that's going to impact you know, people's taste, what they're looking for. So, you know, certainly you got to promote it to the companies internationally, promote it to our own companies. How are we working with businesses in our region to better represent us?
Tom, 30 seconds and we're out, and it's not enough time to give this credit, but cybersecurity, it's clearly here. Is it acute? Is it getting worse? Is it staying the same? Is it a real cost?
It is a real threat. It's a real cost. And if you're a CEO and it's not a real worry, then that's not good. I think you need to worry about it. And especially I think businesses that face the consumer directly, that have more private information, those are real issues that have to be dealt with. And I think it's become one of the biggest issues out there.
You know, wow, I'm not surprised that you could do it, but that really was 30 seconds left. Thank you for doing that and putting that in so much. Come back, please.
Will do.
Okay.
Love to.
Thanks, Tom. Good to see you. John Paul, good to have you here. Come back as well.
Thank you.
Ben, thanks for making the trip from Greenville, as always. If you have any questions or comments, please go to carolinabusinessreview.org. Sorry that's not easier to say, but carolinabusinessreview.org. Make comments and suggestions. Thank you. Have a good weekend. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.